Hello, my fellows. Welcome back to the Maybe Mindful podcast. I am your host, Hannah Mae, and I'm really feeling inspired this week to talk to you and give you a reframe on our problems. And the way of paradox, really, is the lens that I want to view this through, and how we find God in the collision of opposites and circumstances in our life that we view as sometimes unacceptable, objectionable, painful, or just hard to accept. And this is part of life, right? Like, we don't get a ride free of some sort of challenge, struggle, pain, or tragedy because it's inevitable. We have these attachments. We form attachments in relationships. We lose people. We lose ideals. We lose dreams sometimes. We don't have things pan out. And I want to offer a fresh perspective and a reframe on this stuff. Now, it can be really annoying when you're in the middle of some sort of crisis or pain or grief experience and somebody's like, here's the silver lining, and it's actually the doorway, it's actually the opportunity. Now, if you're in a place of pain and you're really needing a way out, to be able to find that doorway, that opportunity is an incredible gift. But it can sometimes feel like a bypass or dismissive or even condescending and shaming. And this is really why I wanted to have this conversation now in this neutral container where I'm not speaking to you about your specific problem, but hopefully it can be a seed that is planted or support some beliefs that you, or wisdom and insight that you've already come to know if you're a seeker, if you've been on a healing journey, if you've been on a spiritually seeking path. Here it is. And so hopefully it will inform you in those moments of challenge, which inevitably are going to happen, to be a little light, an illumination in the midst of what can sometimes feel like darkness. And we can utilize this and apply what I'm going to talk about to everything to really transform your experiences in life. So today I am going to view things through the lens of paradox, the unexpected terrain of spiritual awakening and liberation. And we don't reach the light by avoiding the dark. We, in fact, have to descend into it, to integrate it, to pass through it, in order to really reach the ground of true illumination. And it's in this collision of opposites that we descend into where the light is often born and we access wisdom and insight. And these things can be transformed, and we can have gratitude, in fact, for the things that we once had disdain for. So I was at a funeral this last Friday on Halloween morning. And I did not know the person that had passed, but I cared for the woman that lost a very dear loved one. And it was a sudden, tragic loss. And I showed up just to, pay my respects and out of love for this person. And it was truly a privilege and an honor to be able to be there. And what struck me immediately was the intensity and the heaviness of the grief. And the thing that I simultaneously witnessed was the love that was sustaining them. And this was where it was so powerful and transformative. And they were really being carried and held in this. They were literally, this community and family was obviously very tight-knit. And they were literally physically holding each other up and supporting each other's bodies, those who needed support in their grief. And there was something so beautiful about this. And I just witnessed so many tender exchanges between different groups of people there, and how many people were impacted by this loss. And so, being the energetically sensitive person that I am, an experiential person that I am, I really was able to feel this intensely, but also to feel the love. And it really was a supernatural love that was carrying them, that was flowing through them and sustaining them. And the paradox in that, and the collision of intense opposites, of deep loss and grief and love, that was sustaining and upholding them, that was literally carrying them, was really powerful. And this tragedy made way for that to come through. And I had a moment of exchange with my friend and her daughter. And it was just like they were so obviously in an altered state. They were really, truly in this mist of, it was just like, I can't explain it other than this divine mist and grace that was keeping them afloat and carrying them. When I left, I thought to myself, what an honor and a privilege it was to be able to be here. And the words that went through my mind were, his ways are not our ways, right? No human would choose that. No human chooses that kind of an experience because they know that they cannot bear it unless they're being spiritually sustained by this super substantial, supernatural grace and presence. And so this is really what inspired this episode. And it struck me that this paradox, this place where God shows up, not on one side, but in the space where both truths collide. And so why is a paradox? Why does it have such holy potential? Okay. So a paradox is basically the existence of seeming opposites. So the tension of opposites is a spiritual state if we wish to witness it. And Carl Jung explored this deeply, but there were mystics like Meister Eckhart, who was a Catholic mystic centuries earlier, who also dove into this. And he talks about God being the ground where opposites meet. And so in the paradox, judgment is dissolved, attachment is broken, and attachments are the things that are the cause of our unhappiness, right? And oftentimes it's our attachment to our thought, our belief, our idea, our judgment. And when we lose that, and when we stop trying to categorize it, which is what our ego does, it categorizes, judges, compartmentalizes, assigns things meanings. When it stops doing that, then there's this opening and spirit is allowed in. So, an example of these clashes and these paradoxes are grief and love, like I mentioned, fear and faith, anger, compassion, crucifixion, resurrection, motherhood even, and the loss of self and what you have to give up for this great love that you have for your kids, and the expansion that comes as a result of that and the tension in that. And so the tension of opposites is basically this experience of this, it's an inner experience of being pulled between two opposing forces or truths that seem to contradict, yet both hold validity. And it causes, when we attach to one or the other, polarity. And this polarity is responsible for discord. And all you have to do is look at our political climate and people's views and how polarized we are as a society right now, which I've talked about before. But the person who is able to hold the tension of opposites is able to be present in both sides, in both belief systems, and accept without attaching to either one. And really trusting in something bigger that encompasses the whole. When we have attachments, that's very hard to do. So it's a deeply spiritual thing. The work of detachment is a deeply spiritual work in order to get to that place where we're not like pulled and triggered so much. And so Carl Jung described this tension of opposites as the psychological and spiritual state necessary for individuation. And this is where two opposing forces are not eliminated, but reconciled at a higher level of consciousness. This is where, for example, in shadow work, we face our shadows and we integrate with those things that are very painful. For example, shame. If we discard shame, if we press it down, if we judge it as negative and bad, then all it does is compound the issue and intensify shame and cause us to feel less seen, acknowledged, and held. But the solution and the way we integrate that is by descending into that and meeting ourselves in that sacred place, on that sacred ground of shame where that wound took place. So there's a descent into the wound, and then we are able to transform it by going there with our true self, with our higher self, illuminated by God's love, and therefore it's transformed and we are healed. And this is where healing happens very quickly. This is a spiritual experience when this happens. There's no talking your way into this in a therapy session. That doesn't happen. You can spend years on a problem and in a trauma. I know people who are absolutely, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but they've become almost obsessed with their trauma, and they've become so entrenched in it, they can't find their way out of it. I have been there. It's really painful. It sucks. And the moment that you see that you don't have to stay there is the moment that you can get free of it. But anyways, that's a whole nother story. So Meister Eckhart talks about this. He uses this metaphor of the ground of our soul. And, this is where God meets us, not through us solving our problem, through doing, through striving, through resolution, but through surrender to what is. It's a descent. It's a surrender. It's a letting go. And, our perception can get in the way of this. Our perception can bind us, and the human tendency is to judge. And that's our logical, rational mind at work. And that's a great asset of the human mind. But if we keep things strictly humanized and materialistic, then there's no harmony. We do not come into balance. And so we'll swing from one side of the other, from one pole to the other, until balance is established, until we're able to let go of our attachment to our judgments. So, we judge things as good versus bad, light versus dark, win versus fail. And this keeps us trapped in a limited perception, and this blocks us, in fact, from possibility. The temptation when we're going through something extremely difficult is to spiral into that negative mindset and to believe that. And so, for example, with grief, the risk and the danger is despair, where we fall into darkness and we fail to see the light of hope. And this, if left unchecked, is very dangerous to our well-being, to our mind, to our soul, to our physical being. And this is what can cause somebody to make the ultimate sacrifice and end their life when they find and truly believe that there is no way out. It's a complete loss of light. And this is what sin is. Sin is the death of light in our soul. And it is the turning away from the truth. And it's essentially believing the lie that there is no hope, that there is no way out, that there is no other way. But what I want to speak to hopefully illuminate, is this third option that Carl Jung really talks about. And so he teaches about through holding the tension of opposites, which can take some endurance building because it can feel really intense and does require our own work, like I said. It allows this third pathway to emerge. It's like this doorway into the supernatural. And it's a higher awareness that we get. And it's this experience that transcends the duality. And he talks about the greater the tension, the greater the potential. And this energy, the great energy that springs from this correspondingly great tension of opposites. The greatest example of this is the cross. The cross is a cosmic paradox. It is a sign of contradiction. It literally, and I'm talking about the cross that Jesus died on, the wood, okay? It is not just the symbol of suffering. It's a symbol of heaven and earth, the finite and the infinite. It's this clash of opposites. And it represents transcendence of that clash. I can't even think of anybody who actually embodies an example of holding the tension of opposites more so than Christ, because of what he offered himself up in the face of. He offered himself willingly as a victim. He stood witness to it, and for the purpose of victory over death. And so the cross is the sign of contradiction. And this paradox that we find ourselves in our lives, in our own ways, is representative in a smaller way of that. And what part of us has to die? What part of our ego or self or detachment has to die in order for us to have victory over our problems? So anytime we experience challenge, or we have some type of problem that feels really overwhelming to us, it essentially is a doorway and an opportunity into the depth of our own souls to explore and to discover what kind of treasure is under this. And so I've experienced this many times in either maybe just addressing anger with somebody that I'm holding or addressing fear. There is always, when you take a look at this stuff, an incredible gem underneath it, like such a powerful piece of information. Because if we're having an intense reaction to something, like a fearful response or an angry response or a sad response, whatever it is, there is so much intel. And this is our body communicating to us that which we are needing to respond to and find out what the message is so that we can support ourselves. And this is where we come to know ourselves more deeply and strengthen our relationship and build our foundation. I was reading this morning the book that I pick up from time to time. It's called The Way of Paradox, and it's teachings on Meister Eckhart. And it's part of what inspired this and helped me connect some of these dots. But he talks about it, if the eye of the heart were fully open and we had attained complete divine knowledge, we would see that these contraries are all contained finally in an all-embracing unity. God and man, pleasure and pain, success and failure are ultimately all one in God. We cannot reach this perception save in and through the tension of opposites. And I wrote down after reading that, I just journaled for a little bit and reflected. I wrote, God is the ground where these opposites meet and where conflict is dissolved and the light shines through. That this is where we come out of a polarized perception or judgment and move into radical acceptance. This illuminates the ground of our being and transforms. Through this inner tug of war, we're challenged to expand, and the soul is seeking to expand ultimately. And we get new sight. We get a higher perspective as a result of this expansion. And I was thinking, and this kind of blew my mind, I was just making the connection also with conversational hypnosis, which is one way that I work with my clients, and it yields very quick results, very quick transformations. In fact, I've had some people get really mad at me and say that I'm like, I don't know what they were saying. They were just really mad that I was saying that such a thing was possible. I guess they like to be in their problem. But they were saying I was hustling and like selling something. And I'm not. Like, I'm genuinely sharing good news. And so the thing that's cool about this approach is it's an Ericksonian based approach, and it doesn't use the traditional inductions or directed hypnotic approaches. I do work with people in that way as well, but this is pretty different. And sometimes this is all people need, oftentimes actually. And sometimes we'll go on to do 5-path or 7-path after that. But this is really incredible because what it does, it allows you to enter into and really get inside of the paradox that you're otherwise feeling trapped outside of. So it feels like this unsolvable problem that you might have struggled with for years, and then you kind of move inside it and you start to see things from a different perspective. Now, when you move into this paradox and you really see it, it can feel disorienting and confusing. But what happens is there's this scrambling in the subconscious that happens, and there's simultaneously a reorganization that happens. And it's really solving the problem from the bottom up instead of top down. And this is really cool because it allows the person to essentially unravel the knot from the inside and solve their own problem. And so this is where you have radical, rapid transformation. You begin to have a new experience immediately. And sometimes people have this on the session, and sometimes it happens maybe over the days or weeks after the session because there's processing involved where you've opened up this subject with your subconscious and it literally just processes, and you'll continue to have insights, wisdom, clarity, and you might have a breakthrough maybe a week later, 10 days later, or you might have it on the call. And so it's a result of this radical perspective shift that then this third way presents, this third door becomes available. And you really can only do that by honestly meeting yourself and coming face to face with it. And it obviously helps to have somebody guide you in that process, because it can be tough to do on your own until you learn how to do it. And sometimes, and this is really interesting, I always get a lot out of my sessions just by witnessing. I'm really elevated and lifted up when my clients have breakthroughs. But this one particular session recently, I had this weird wave, which was really abnormal for me, of imposter syndrome, like this wave of imposter syndrome after I got off the call. It was almost immediate, and I was like sort of disturbed by it, and it didn't feel good. But I was like, all right, well, I know just to witness that, I know that's information. I was really just curious about it. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to be present with this and see what comes forward. And I didn't try and solve it or fix it or anything, as uncomfortable as it was. And I moved through my day and I did some things I had to do. And this really interesting thing happened. At the end of the day, there was this opening, and out of the blue, like this insight dropped in, and I got this wave. It was sort of like this stream of this little river of information and insight. And God was saying, these insights are for you. The insights and the wisdom that I held space for her to receive, that she gathered and received in her session, right? And so in those sessions, I don't give them that insight. I don't make those suggestions. I hold the space and watch for the subconscious moments and just support them on that. And so those moments came forward for her, and it helped her have a shift. And it was just so cool, because I've never experienced a session in that way, where it was like those insights were equally applicable to me. And I think what was happening was my subconscious was resisting them for some reason. There was something in me that knew I needed to receive those at a deeper level also. And so they came in later, and it was really powerful. And I was so grateful. I just thought that was worth sharing, because this really is powerful work. And when you're working with the subconscious, you're tapping something very deep in yourself that is waiting to be accessed. And so many times we don't access or even come close to that which is available for us in life. And so I am committed to sharing this to help people understand what is accessible and what is available to them if they're open to it. And it really comes down to belief. So before I close, I just want to say, like, sometimes there's this tendency I've noticed for people to over spiritualize this stuff. I do believe in spiritual warfare, very much so. I believe it's playing out through us on this planet right now in a pretty radical way. And I think it's really important to be aware of that. But the danger in saying that something is spiritual oppression is, in a way, to give it power. It might be, and I'm not disagreeing with you that it is, but I also know and have experienced that through belief, through elevating my gaze, and through understanding that these things don't have power over me unless I agree to them and come into some sort of consent with them. Those oppressions or afflictions can also be essentially a stepping stone that my higher power will allow me to use, that are there basically designed for me to leverage my spiritual growth, for me to get a little higher up, get that higher vantage point. So I just want to say that, because a lot of times we fall into victim mentality and then we become afraid. And fear is just as much of an enemy as anything else, and can be responsible for our undoing and unraveling more than anything else. So fear is not something that we want to consent or believe. I mean, it is really powerful because it's a force, but we always have the option to move out of fear and to move into trust. So I hope that this was somewhat illuminative or helpful or inspiring for you. I look forward to your feedback, and have an awesome week. Thank you for tuning in to the May Be Mindful podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at maybemindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,